It's okay, boy. We'll get you out of here.
In the dimly lit auction barn, amidst a sea of bidders vying for prized horses, one broken-down gelding stood unnoticed, a shadow of his former self, sold for just $1 to a stranger who saw something no one else did. Dusty, once a champion racer, had been discarded by society, his body battered and his spirit nearly extinguished. But fate works in mysterious ways, and Luke Carter, a man burdened by his own regrets, recognized the flicker of hope still burning in the horse's weary eyes. What happened next was nothing short of miraculous, a journey of healing, redemption, and the unbreakable bond between human and animal that would defy all odds. Luke wasn't new to hardship. He had spent years trying to mend the fractures in his life after losing everything: his family farm, his dreams, and even his sense of purpose. Yet, when he looked at Dusty, he didn't see failure. He saw a chance to rebuild not only the horse's life, but also his own. Together, they embarked on a path filled with challenges, triumphs, and moments of profound connection that reminded them both what it meant to truly live again. This tale will remind you that second chances aren't just possible, they're transformative. It's a story of resilience, forgiveness, and the power of love to heal wounds deeper than scars. Through Luke's determination and Dusty's quiet courage, we are reminded that sometimes the greatest victories come from daring to start over. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more inspiring tales of courage, connection, and the incredible bonds between humans and animals. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into Luke and Dusty's unforgettable journey, a testament to the power of hope and healing. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment of redemption that changed everything? Let us know in the comments below. The crowd at the county horse auction murmured with disinterest as the next horse was led into the ring. It was an uninspiring sight, thin, dust-caked, with a limp in its rear right leg, and ribs clearly visible beneath its dull, patchy coat. A few people scoffed, turning away. Others laughed, shaking their heads. Even the auctioneer paused a beat too long before raising his microphone. All right, next up, number 61. Gelding, 6 years old. No papers. Starting bid at $1. A ripple of laughter passed through the audience. No one raised a hand. At the back of the auction ring, an old man stood quietly beside a broken fence post. He wore a sun-bleached hat and a coat with a missing button. His boots were caked in dried mud and dust. His name was Elijah Creel. Most didn't know him. Those who did whispered stories about the ranch he lost, the son who disappeared, and the silence he'd chosen instead of company. Elijah studied the horse through narrowed eyes. The creature shifted its weight nervously, tugging slightly against the lead rope held by the wrangler. Its eyes weren't wild. They were tired, beaten, but not broken. And somewhere beneath the filth and the tremble, Elijah saw something he hadn't seen in years. He raised his hand. $1, he said. The auctioneer squinted. We've got $1. Do I hear two? Silence. Going once, going twice. The gavel hit the wood with a clack that sounded like a final judgment. Sold to the gentleman in the back. Snickers followed Elijah as he made his way to the side gate. One man muttered, "Should have paid him to take it." Another called after him, "That horse is more glue than gallop, old man." Elijah didn't respond. He simply nodded to the wrangler, who handed over the lead. The horse didn't resist, just stood there as if it had already accepted every bad turn life had thrown at it. They walked slowly toward Elijah's rusting trailer, parked at the far end of the lot. Each step the horse took clicked softly on the gravel, its limp more noticeable now. Elijah moved without hurry, as if matching the animal's broken rhythm. When they reached the trailer, he spoke for the first time. "Name's Samson," he said, patting the horse gently. "Don't know yours yet, but we'll get there." He opened the trailer gate, waited, and after a moment's hesitation, the horse stepped in. The drive back to Elijah's ranch took an hour. Fields rolled past, golden and brown, dotted with half-collapsed fences and wind-battered barns. His property, once thriving, had dwindled to a few manageable acres. Most of the barns were boarded up. Only one stable remained standing, though it leaned to one side like a man favoring a weak hip. Elijah parked beside it, lowered the ramp, and whistled softly. The horse backed out, head low. He led it to a stall, spread clean straw, and set out a bucket of water. "No rush," he murmured. "You got time now." That night, Elijah sat on the porch with a cup of weak coffee, watching the stars blink into place above the wide plain. He could hear the horse shifting in the stall, occasionally letting out a breath, as if it were too tired even to dream. Elijah hadn't planned on buying anything. He came to auctions sometimes just to see what was being discarded, perhaps out of habit more than purpose. But the moment he saw that horse, something shifted. It reminded him of the last one he'd owned, Cypress, a wild Mustang he'd spent years training, a creature full of fire and fury that eventually became his closest companion. They used to ride across the plains together in silence, communicating with pressure and presence instead of words. But Cypress had died 5 years ago, not long after Elijah's son disappeared without a trace. Since then, the stables had been empty, and Elijah had spoken to fewer people than he could count on one hand. He wasn't trying to replace Cypress. That wasn't possible. But he also couldn't shake the feeling that this horse, this rejected, limping creature, deserved more than laughter and pity. Morning came with a stiff wind and the cries of distant hawks. Elijah rose before the sun, grabbed a bucket of oats, and made his way to the stall. The horse eyed him wearily, but didn't flinch when he entered. "Going to call you Dusty," Elijah said, "'cause that's what you were when I found you." Dusty didn't react. He sniffed at the oats, then took a slow, cautious bite. Over the next few days, Elijah kept his distance. He didn't try to ride Dusty or push him into anything. He cleaned the stall, brought fresh hay, and let the horse watch him as he moved around the yard. Slowly, Dusty began to lift his head more. He walked with slightly more weight on his bad leg. When Elijah approached with a brush, the horse didn't shy away, just stood still, eyes tracking every motion. Elijah spoke in low tones, more to fill the silence than anything else. He talked about the weather, the rust on his truck, the price of feed, and then one evening, he talked about his son. His name was Luke, he said, brushing Dusty's mane. Liked horses more than people. Took off one night after we had a fight, never came back. Not a word, not a letter. Dusty flicked an ear. Every time I came to an auction, part of me thought maybe I'd see him there, with some horse he saved. But it's always just ghosts. The wind stirred the dry grass outside. Elijah paused, hand resting gently on the horse's neck. "You're the first one I brought home since." That night, for the first time in years, Elijah left the stable door cracked open, letting the sound of breathing travel between walls. Days turned into a week. Dusty's limp eased with rest and better feed. He gained weight, muscle forming under his coat, like something long forgotten returning. Elijah didn't rush. He watched for signs, waited for permission. Eventually, he took Dusty into the round pen. No saddle, no bridle, just a rope halter and patience. Dusty walked in circles, ears flicking, body tense but not rebellious. Elijah moved with practiced steps, guiding without forcing. And when Dusty finally turned toward him, head lowered, Elijah nodded. "That's it. That's the start." Behind them, the sun slipped low behind the barn, casting their silhouettes long across the dust. It was a quiet moment, but in Elijah's chest, something stirred, a feeling he hadn't known in years. Hope. And hope, like horses, always starts with trust. Elijah stood at the edge of the round pen, arms folded, eyes fixed on Dusty as the horse trotted under a pale morning sun. The limp had softened to a faint hitch, and the dull coat now shimmered faintly with sweat and health. Dusty still flinched at sudden noises and paused when shadows moved too fast. But he responded to Elijah's voice like a weary soldier recognizing a familiar command. Trust was forming, but like an old rope, it would take weight before proving its strength. The training sessions grew longer. Elijah never pushed too hard. He didn't have time for impatience anymore. He let Dusty dictate the pace, rewarding the smallest acts of courage. A few steps toward him unasked, a stillness during brushing, a moment when Dusty stood without trembling while the saddle blanket was laid across his back. By the second week, Elijah introduced the saddle. Dusty stiffened beneath the weight, but didn't bolt. Elijah murmured quiet encouragement, adjusting the cinch slowly, letting the horse feel everything without fear of punishment. When the bit finally went into Dusty's mouth, the gelding resisted only slightly, more from uncertainty than rebellion. That afternoon, Elijah eased himself into the saddle for the first time. His old knees complained, and his back groaned under the shift in balance. Dusty stood still, muscles taut. Elijah breathed deep, letting the tension drain from his frame. Dusty held still, ears flicked back in question. "We're all right," Elijah whispered. "Just you and me." They moved in a slow circle, no faster than a walk. Elijah guided with pressure, not reins. Dusty responded hesitantly, but obeyed. Every step was a negotiation between past trauma and present grace. By the end of the ride, Elijah dismounted with care and rubbed the horse's face. Dusty leaned slightly into the touch. Later that evening, as the sun bruised the sky in red and purple, Elijah sat on the porch sipping coffee. The world around him had become a rhythm again. Mornings in the saddle, afternoons fixing fences, evenings with Dusty nearby. There was still silence, but no longer felt empty. He turned when the sound of car, tires on gravel, reached his ears. A truck he didn't recognize pulled into the drive, shiny, newer, clean, too clean for this place. Elijah rose slowly, placing his cup down, heart quickening, though he didn't know why. A man stepped out, early 40s tall, well-dressed in dark jeans and a crisp button-down. His hair was shorter than Elijah remembered. Face leaner, older, but the eyes. Elijah froze. "Luke." His son stopped mid-step. "Hey, Dad." It had been 12 years. 12 years of unanswered letters. Birthdays skipped. Holidays passed in silence. Elijah's mouth worked, but no sound came. Luke scratched the back of his neck, unsure of himself. "I heard from someone you'd been to the auction," Luke said. "A friend of mine in town said you walked out with a half-dead horse and looked 10 years older." "I didn't think you'd ever come back," Elijah said. "I didn't think I would either." They stood in silence, the years pressing between them like invisible walls. Finally, Elijah gestured toward the porch. "You hungry?" Luke nodded. "Always." Inside, over reheated stew and old bread, words came slowly. Luke spoke of the places he'd been. Ranches out west, some good, some bad. He'd worked colts, repaired barns, lived out of trucks. He didn't apologize, not exactly, but something in his tone asked forgiveness without demanding it. Elijah listened, nodding occasionally. When Luke mentioned Cypress, the horse he'd loved as a boy, Elijah looked away. "He died the year after you left," Elijah said. "Wandered into the north pasture one night and never came back." "I figured," Luke murmured. He was always half-wild. After dinner, Elijah brought Luke out to the stable. Dusty stood in his stall, ears twitching. "He looked worse when I got him," Elijah said. "Had nothing left in him but air and hope." Luke stepped closer, eyeing the horse with the practiced gaze of someone who knew a wounded spirit when he saw one. "He's got more fight than I thought," he said. "That limp won't stop him forever. His eyes are still sharp." "I wasn't looking for another," Elijah said. "Didn't think I could care again." Luke didn't reply right away. He reached out, let Dusty sniff his hand, then ran fingers gently down the horse's neck. "You cared anyway." For the next week, father and son fell into a rhythm. Luke stayed in the old guest room, cleaned the tool shed, fixed a leaking pipe under the kitchen sink. They didn't talk about the past often, just enough to acknowledge it, like poking an old bruise to check if it still hurt. Together, they worked with Dusty. Luke rode him once, after asking Elijah's permission, and Dusty responded with grace and a touch of defiance. It was clear the horse hadn't just learned commands. He had learned to trust, to choose who he allowed close. One morning, while tightening a girth strap, Luke asked, "What are you going to do with him?" Elijah shrugged. "Keep him, ride him, let him be what he wants. You could show him. Local fairs coming up." He'd turn heads. "I'm not much for crowds." Luke nodded but didn't press. That evening, Elijah found an envelope on the porch bench. Inside was a folded flyer, Spring County Horse Show, 3 weeks out. On the back, in Luke's handwriting, were the words, "I'll ride him if you let me, or stand beside you if you change your mind." Elijah held the flyer a long while. The idea made his chest ache, not from fear, but from how much he wanted it. That night he lay awake, listening to the soft rustle of Dusty in his stall, the occasional creak of the windmill. He thought of the moment Luke had walked away all those years ago, his boots kicking up dust as he vanished down the road, and the moment he came back, quieter, older, but still his son. The next morning, Elijah walked out to the pasture where Luke was tossing hay into the trough. "If you think he's ready," Elijah said, "well, go." Luke turned, squinting against the sun. "He's ready." They looked toward the stable where Dusty stood, framed in the open doorway, the wind teasing his mane. He looked toward them, eyes alert, body no longer frail or fearful. The fair was 3 weeks away. 3 weeks to prepare, 3 weeks to prove that redemption wasn't a prize won in one act, but in the daily choosing to stay, to try, to heal. And the choosing had already begun. The fairgrounds buzzed with life. Laughter, hooves on packed dirt, the faint notes of fiddle music drifting between barns and booths. Elijah stood near the ring, his weathered hands gripping the top rail, trying to appear calm. His eyes, however, betrayed the truth. They followed Dusty like a prayer made flesh. Dusty looked nothing like the broken creature from the auction. His coat shimmered bronze in the morning light, muscles defined, stride strong and even. The faint limp had become barely noticeable, a ghost of its former self. He held his head high, alert but not afraid. As Luke guided him into the warm-up circle, the crowd turned to watch, murmuring with interest. This wasn't just a horse being led in. It was a story unfolding. Luke wore a plain blue shirt, dusty jeans, and an expression of calm confidence that Elijah hadn't seen since his son was a teenager. He spoke softly to Dusty, adjusting the reins with practiced ease. They moved as one. Horse and rider bonded not just by training, but by something deeper, mutual recovery, mutual forgiveness. The competition wasn't glamorous. Local riders, young and old, had gathered for the sake of pride, tradition, and sometimes a blue ribbon. But to Elijah, this ring was more than a show. It was a reckoning, a chance to prove that nothing, no pain, no time, no mistake, was beyond redemption. Dusty's event was a trail course built to mimic the obstacles of real ranch life. Gates to open, poles to step over, a small bridge to cross. What mattered wasn't speed, but control, trust, precision. Luke guided Dusty to the start. The judge gave a nod. The air felt suddenly thin. The first gate came easy. Dusty stopped, waited for Luke's cue, then sidestepped with delicate patience as Luke leaned down to unlatch and push it open. The crowd murmured approval. Then the bridge. Elijah held his breath. Dusty hesitated, nostrils flaring. The wooden slats creaked beneath another horse's earlier pass. Luke didn't rush him. He loosened the reins, gave a gentle nudge with his heels, and whispered something low, private. Dusty stepped forward, ears twitching. One hoof touched the wood, then another. Slowly he crossed. By the time they reached the other side, the quiet clapping from the bleachers grew into genuine applause. They finished the course without flaw. No theatrics, no flash, just precision and poise. When the scores were announced, Dusty took second place. The rider who beat them was a young girl with a perfectly bred quarter horse and a dazzling performance. Elijah didn't care. Neither did Luke. They weren't chasing ribbons. They'd already won something more lasting. After the awards, Luke brought Dusty back to the trailer. Elijah met them halfway, one hand resting on the halter, the other brushing the gelding's neck with reverence. "You made him whole," Luke said quietly. "No," Elijah replied. "He made us whole." As the crowd dispersed and trucks began pulling out, Luke lingered beside the trailer, eyes distant. Elijah watched him, noting the quiet tension that had crept back into his son's posture. "You thinking about leaving again?" Elijah asked. Luke hesitated. "I've got offers, places to go, but I don't know anymore." I'm not asking you to stay, Elijah said, but the fence line still needs mending. That south pasture hasn't seen a good hand in years. Luke looked at him, eyes narrowing. You offer me a job? Elijah gave a half smile. I'm offering you a place. You decide what to make of it. The words hung there, simple, solid, and full of weight. That night, the farm slept under a blanket of cool air and crickets. Elijah sat on the porch, a fresh cup of coffee in his hands. Luke joined him, lowering himself into the chair with the tired grace of someone who had worked and earned every ache. They didn't speak for a while. They didn't need to. Dusty grazed quietly under the moonlight, his silhouette calm and strong. I used to think Cypress was the only horse I'd ever bond with, Luke finally said. That once he died, I didn't have it in me to start over. You weren't the only one who thought that way, Elijah said. But now I see. Sometimes you don't find the right horse. Sometimes they find you. Elijah nodded. Same goes for people. A long silence stretched between them, but it was comfortable, like an old coat finally fitting right again. In the morning, Luke saddled Dusty again, this time without the pressure of judges or spectators. They rode out beyond the fences, past the pasture's edge where the trees grew tall and the land sloped gently down toward the river. Elijah followed on foot, watching them from a distance, the way a man watches a future he didn't think he'd live to see. Dusty's gait was smooth and fluid. Luke rode with the quiet confidence of someone finally at peace. When they returned, Elijah was fixing a broken board on the corral fence. Luke dismounted, tied Dusty loosely, and grabbed a hammer. Where do you want me? He asked. Elijah handed him a nail. Start at the corner. They worked in silence, side by side, as the sun climbed over the hills. The morning air was filled with the scent of hay, old wood, and healing. Dusty watched them from his place in the shade, one hoof cocked in rest, the wind playing with his mane. There was no grand ending, no triumphant music, just the steady rhythm of men working, of lives mending plank by plank. And somewhere between the swing of the hammer and the creak of old boards, a father and son found what they didn't even know they were looking for. Not just a home, not just forgiveness, but a beginning. The sun rose slowly over the valley, casting long amber streaks across the hills and dousing the ranch in a quiet warmth. Dusty stood at the fence, ears flicking toward the barn, his breath visible in the crisp morning air. Luke approached with a curry comb in one hand and an old feed bucket in the other. His steps were measured, his shoulders looser than they had been in years. A week had passed since the show, and every day since he had taken the gelding out, sometimes for a ride, sometimes just to stand beside him and let the silence do the talking. Elijah watched from the porch, arms crossed, cup of black coffee cooling in his grip. He hadn't said much since the morning Luke picked up the hammer. He didn't need to. Some changes were better shown than spoken. But this morning felt different. Luke moved slower, as if his mind wasn't fully with him. He set the feed bucket down, leaned on the fence, and stared out at the horizon. Dusty nudged him gently, but Luke didn't react. He was somewhere else, thinking, calculating. You're leaving, aren't you? Elijah asked, not unkindly, not even surprised. Luke looked back without guilt. Just for a few weeks. A friend of mine's working a cattle drive out in Montana. He needs an extra hand. Elijah nodded once. Horse or no horse? Luke rubbed Dusty's neck, fingers brushing the mane with absent tenderness. If Dusty's willing, I'd like to take him. It'd be good for both of us. There was a pause. Elijah stepped down from the porch and walked to the fence, boots crunching softly in the gravel. He leaned beside his son, shoulder to shoulder, both of them facing the pasture as if it held all the answers. I spent years trying to make this place everything your mama would have wanted, Elijah said, voice low. In doing that, I forgot to be what you needed. Luke blinked, but didn't turn. I wasn't ready to stay even if you'd asked. No, Elijah agreed. But maybe I should have tried anyway. They stood like that for a long while. Dusty nickered softly, then went back to chewing the last bits of hay. I'll be back, Luke said finally. This time I mean it. Elijah looked at him, searching. Why? Luke chuckled faintly. Because for the first time I want to. That evening, the barn glowed gold as the sun dipped low behind the hills. Luke packed light: saddle, rope, a few tools, and a worn leather journal his mother had given him years ago. Dusty was already loaded into the trailer, calm and steady, as if he understood this was another chapter, not an ending. As Luke latched the doors and tightened the last strap, Elijah came up beside him with a faded handkerchief in his hand. He offered it silently. Luke took it, puzzled, until he unfolded it. Inside was a small brass spur, aged but polished, and a folded note in Elijah's handwriting. "It was your granddad's," Elijah said. "He always said it reminded him that leading with pressure only works if you give them the release too." Luke swallowed hard, nodding once. "Thanks." They shook hands, not as strangers, not even as just father and son, but as men who had come through fire and found each other on the other side. The truck rumbled to life, the trailer clanking behind it. Elijah stood at the gate, watching them disappear down the dirt road, dust kicking up in the red light of dusk. A week later, a letter arrived. It wasn't long, just a few lines in Luke's quick, slanted handwriting. Dusty crossed the river like he owned it. First day, he outworked every other mount. You were right. He wasn't broken, just waiting for the right hand. I think maybe I was too. Tell the fence it'll get mended when I get back. Luke. Elijah read it 3 times, then sat on the kitchen table beside his coffee mug. He looked out the window toward the corral, now empty, and smiled. The wind rustled the tall grass, and for a moment he could almost hear hoof beats in it. Out in Montana, the nights were colder, the stars clearer. Luke sat beside the fire, Dusty tied nearby, quietly munching his feed. Other cowboys laughed and swapped stories, but Luke was content to sit in the glow and write in his journal, the old brass spur resting beside him in the dirt. Dusty raised his head, ears pricking, then settled again. Luke looked up from the page and smiled. He didn't know what the next month would bring, but he knew where he belonged now. And more importantly, he knew he could always come home. For Luke, this journey wasn't just about saving a horse. It was about finding himself again. In Dusty's eyes, he saw a reflection of his own struggles and triumphs, a mirror of the strength they had both discovered through mutual trust and respect. As they worked side by side, fixing the old corral fence plank by plank, Luke realized that healing wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic endings. It was about the quiet, steady rhythm of progress, the kind that happens when 2 hearts choose to move forward together. This story is a powerful reminder that every act of kindness has the potential to change lives, including your own. Whether it's rescuing a neglected horse or simply being there for someone in need, these moments of compassion teach us that no one is beyond saving. If this tale touched your heart, please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of hope, resilience, and the incredible bonds between humans and animals. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that even in the darkest times, light can still shine. And let us know in the comments, what lesson did you take away from Luke and Dusty's journey? Thank you for joining us today. And remember, sometimes the smallest acts of faith can lead to the greatest miracles.